Before we proceed with the items on the agenda, I need to remind you of the usual housekeeping messages. Should the fire alarm sound, please leave the chamber by the nearest door, then follow the illuminated signs and assemble in the car park at the front of the building, as directed by the fire wardens, who you'll recognise as the Democratic Service officers. Also, would you please ensure that your phones and tablet devices are in silent mode? Thank you. The first item on the agenda is to apologise for absence. An apology for absence has so far been received from Councillor Moon. Are there any other apologies? Councillor Williams.
Councillor Rayner.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the confirmation of minutes. Can I please have a proposal that the minutes of the council meeting, which was held on the 9th of January 2020, be approved as a correct record?
Happy to move those minutes, Madam Mayor.
Is there a seconder for that proposal?
Happy to second it, Madam Mayor.
Does anyone want to comment on the factual accuracy of the minutes or propose an amendment? In that case, would those members present at the 9th of January meeting who are in favour of confirming the minutes as a correct record, please indicate. Those against?
6.
Are there any abstentions? The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the declarations of interest. Do any members or officers have any interest to declare on any item included on the agenda? No. The next item is announcements. I have 3 announcements this evening. Firstly, a final reminder that the Mayor's Civic dinner is to be held at the North Euston Hotel, Fleetwood, on Friday, the 28th of February 2020 at 7 o'clock. If you wish to attend but have not yet booked, please contact Andrea Mullen as soon as possible. And thank you to all those people who have booked already. Secondly, a reminder that a spring concert by the Blackpool Male Voice Choir, and to include a Fleetwood school as well, will be held at St Nicholas Church in Fleetwood. And that's on Saturday, the 21st of March 2020, starting at 7:30. Tickets are on sale from Andrea Mullen at a cost of £8 each, but there is a possibility of paying at the door. And finally, she's not here, but her husband is, so I'm going to ask Roger to convey this message, please, Councillor Berry. I'd like to thank Joan Berry for organising the Angel Night last night, which was held at the Cube in Poulton, and also to thank all those people who attended and supported me in any way. Thank you, Councillor Berry. We now move on to public questions and statements. However, it seems there are no such questions or statements being submitted. So we're going to move on to item 6, which is the questions on notice from councillors. We have one question this evening from Councillor Gerard to the Neighbourhood Services and Community Safety Portfolio holder, Councillor Berry, about the Police and Crime Panel, which is set out on the agenda. Councillor Berry, would you please respond to that question now?
I will, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm replying to this question as I am Wyre's representative on the Police and Crime Panel. The Police and Crime Panel for Lancashire has the power to scrutinise and review the decisions and actions taken by the Police and Crime Commissioner in connection with the discharge of his functions and role. These powers, which are granted by the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011, include, firstly, the ability to review his police and crime plan in which the Commissioner outlined his priorities for the constabulary over the coming years, and his annual report, in which he covers the progress made in meeting the objectives in that plan. Secondly, the panel is able to request papers from him and call him and the Chief Constable to public hearings. Thirdly, the panel can veto his proposal for the amount of the police precept, which, as you know, is included in the council tax bill. Fourthly, they can veto his choice in the appointment of a new Chief Constable. And finally, they have the power to receive and consider complaints made against the Commissioner. Under very special circumstances, the panel can suspend a Commissioner and appoint a deputy. I think it's important to stress that the panel do not hold the police to account, as this is the role of the Commissioner. The Lancashire panel is made up of representatives from the 15 local authorities in Lancashire, together with 2 independent co-opted members. Councillors serve for 12 months, and they then have to be re-elected by their councillors. The independent co-opted members are appointed by the panel and serve for a period of 4 years. The panel currently comprises 9 Labour councillors, 4 Conservatives, 1 Lib Dem and 1 Independent, plus the 2 co-opted members. The panel can be extended to 20 members, particularly to achieve a political and geographical balance, but agreement on this has not recently been achieved. I hope that covers the points that you've raised, Councillor, and explains it to you.
It certainly does, Councillor Berry. I was just wondering, if we have a meeting in Fleetwood about the rising crime, could you be able to call on the Commissioner to come along and talk to us?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I do mention from time to time, and in fact I mentioned it at the meeting on Tuesday, where the precept, his proposal for a precept was agreed by a majority. The precept, incidentally, is will add an additional £10 onto the council tax bill for Band D properties. And I particularly mentioned that I was not happy that our neighbourhood policing teams had been really decimated in Wyre. And whilst he agrees with the sentiments I'm expressing, he's not spending the money on it, and he's spending it on other things. And I forcibly drew to his attention that, you know, I did feel that we needed a rejig and a rethink about neighbourhood policing teams. So, yes, if you have any particular points, then I can mention it and ask for him to appear in Fleetwood. But I do know that he does come round the Lancashire area, so he does visit properties, so areas. So I have no doubt that he'll be pleased to include Fleetwood in his visits.
Thank you, Councillor Berry. The next item on the agenda is executive reports. Firstly, we'll have the report of the Leader of the Council. Councillor Henderson, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's not a lot to add to the report apart from one item that's of interest, and that was an item that happened today. It was an event at Myerscough College that was held today that Councillor Sir Robert Atkins and I attended on behalf of Wyre Borough. It was an absolutely excellent day. It was to showcase Myerscough College. It was called an Arbour Day, which I thought was a very easy way to try to say arboriculturalist, because I could never get around that word. Personally, I'd have used the words Tree Day, because that's what it was all about. But when we got there, we found out it was a little bit more than that, and there was an absolute excellent careers event as well for the student that many outside agencies were at, offering students what they could look towards in the future when they'd finished the studies. And it was good to see that it wasn't just about the rural life in itself. There were representatives there from the police force, the prison service, which surprised me, and the armed forces, all aimed at what students could look forward to in the future. There was a tree planting, which Sir Robert did, and he's getting very good at that now, to practice for the future. But all in all, Madam Mayor, that was an absolutely excellent day, and it shows just how really lucky Wyre are to have Myerscough College here within our authority. Take questions, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Can we have Councillor Beavis first, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Henderson. No one was more pleased than me to see Grant Shapps rock up at Poulton Station last week and announce the 100k towards a feasibility study into the Fleetwood and Poulton rail link. But what I do find astounding is the sudden U-turn from the Wyre Conservatives on this, and the decision to now support the reconnection of the Fleetwood to Poulton link, which, let's be honest, has not always been the case. In fact, while Wyre Labour stood shoulder to shoulder with the people of Fleetwood, Thornton and Cleveland, asking Wyre to fight for the reinstatement of the link, sadly, until now, our requests have fallen on deaf ears. We had the 2012 Transport Infrastructure Task Group. This called for the reinstatement of the line. This was noted and ignored. When Wyre Labour put forward an amendment to the 2018 business plan, asking that improved transport connectivity should be a priority, this was firmly rejected by the Wyre Conservative group. Then last March, when Wyre Labour put forward a budget amendment to allocate 35k for a rail reinstatement feasibility study, Wyre Conservatives, as usual, voted against progress. But now at long last, Wyre Conservatives have decided to stand with the people of Wyre and Wyre Labour Group. They hopefully will fight with us for our vision of the reinstatement of the Fleetwood to Poulton train line. The Labour Group would like to welcome you all to the team at last. So together, let's get Fleetwood and the rest of Wyre back on track.
Leader, would you like to respond to that, please?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor. What an absolute load of political claptrap. I've never heard so much rubbish in my life. Let's go back to 2008, 12 years ago. Wyre Borough Council, Conservative-led Wyre Borough Council, pledged £30,000 and put £30,000 into the pot to start off a Grip 1 and a Grip 2 study to look at the feasibility of reinstating the rail line with heavy rail. At that time it was to be a heritage line. That's all that was on the table, a heritage line and nothing else. We put that money forward. The Grip 1 and the Grip 2 study came up with the answer, and that it was needed to have even more money put towards it, but that a heavy rail line, while welcomed, was not actually the complete and the full answer. If you wanted to move up now to modern days, there is a cross-party, not just Labour in Fleetwood, but there is a cross-party round Fylde who want to reopen that line because over the last few years it has become blatantly obvious that heavy rail in itself would not do it. It might be that heavy rail might work, but it's looking at possibly light rail or tram, and that's the feasible one. In those intervening years, Wyre looked at possibly taking up the rail track bed, putting a bus on there to get from Fleetwood to Poulton. But what really made me smile these last few weeks is it's been Fleetwood this, Fleetwood that. There's two ends to a railway line, and there's the other ends at Poulton. 100 cars a day come into Poulton and park up and get on the train and go to wherever they're going. Then they come back at tea time, they get in the cars and they go back to wherever they're going. And that's Thornton and Fleetwood and surrounding areas. I've had one person say to me in the last week, It would be great if we could get a tram on there, because my husband and I, who live at Hawley Gardens at Thornton, drive to Poulton. I work in Poulton, he works in Preston. We park at the Civic Centre because it's easy. Walk up to the railway station and then go to our respective jobs. But I have to wait till he finishes work, which is in the
Leader, you're
evening.
into your last 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The bottom line is that we've got cross-party working. Blackpool, Labour-controlled, Fyle and ourselves looking towards trying to reopen this. Ben Wallace has worked behind the scenes, as Paul Maynard has as well, to get this first £100,000. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Fail.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In the Leader's report, it refers to bids for one public estate funding and states that the Chief Exec submitted a report on housing growth to November's Lancashire Leaders meeting that included recommendations to accelerate housing growth, including the development of a Lancashire housing strategy. Although the need for housing is recognised, I'm just wondering why there is a need to accelerate housing growth. After all, here in Wyre, it's not as if there is currently a strategy in place that assesses the requirements of climate change or one that ensures that employment and transport is put in place prior to housing provision. A 2005 report to Wyre's Cabinet stated that housing provision should be a response to economic growth and not a prelude to it. That was 15 years ago, and since that, the approach actually taken has been exactly the opposite, with the local employment position now much worse, the daily commute out of Wyre out of control, and the congestion on our roads a daily scenario. So when we see a report to full council promoting accelerated housing growth, we need to take a step back and take a reality check. The Leader's report mentions developing a Lancashire housing strategy, which on the face of it sounds positive. As always, the devil is in the detail, and the question is, will it allay the fears of councillors and residents and strategically tackle the issues I have mentioned? But perhaps the Leader can provide a definitive statement as to whether or not Wyre Council will finally grasp the nettle of all these thorny issues by putting in place a joined-up strategy for housing, employment, transport and open space at the same time as taking on the challenges of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fail. Leader, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, certainly. Don't know how many times we've told Councillor Fail about climate change and how people for years and years, for generations, have left Wyre to go and work elsewhere because everybody wants to live here. Said that time and time again, and people before me have said it as well. You've mentioned the Chief Executive. There are 15 authorities in Lancashire, and 12 of those are Labour-led. 3 of us are Conservative-led. 11 Labour-led, 4 Conservative-led. Our Chief Executive has been asked to do the Lancashire lead for housing theme for the whole of Lancashire, to work out where things need to go in Lancashire. Our Chief Executive has been asked to do it because actually he's very, very good in that field. Nobody else in Lancashire has been asked to do it. Once again, Wyre Borough Council provides somebody to take the lead to try to make Lancashire, Labour-dominated, a better place to live and to work. Also, when you keep asking Councillor Fail time and time again those same questions, everything is in the local plan. That's what the local plan's there for. The planning policy group look at these things, they work it out. It is agreed in the planning policy group before it moves on. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Sir Robert Atkin, please.
Madam Mayor, I just want to endorse what the Leader said about Myerscough today. And not only was it in itself a very useful visit, but it allowed me, as the chairman of the Climate Change Policy Group, to talk to both the principal and the deputy principal about what this very important educational facility could do for us in Wyre. as many people know, many colleagues will know, it is a significant player on that, in that area of education. And I've arranged to go back and talk to both the principal and the deputy principal about what they can offer to us as a borough in relation to climate change and the advantages that they could gain by encouraging young people to appreciate that there is money to be made in environmental technology and consultancy, as well as actually the planting of trees and all the other things that they do. And I hope that what Councillor Henderson said earlier can be endorsed by colleagues, because it's an organisation and a location which we ought to value.
We will now move on to the report of the Resources Portfolio Holder. Councillor Alan Vincent, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The report's before councillors. If there are any questions, I'll attempt to answer them.
Are there any questions or comments for Councillor Vincent? No comments, so in that case, can we conclude the consideration of the report and move on to the next one? It's the Street Scene, Parks and Open Spaces Portfolio Holder. Councillor Bridge, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My report's excuse me, in front of you. If there are any questions, don't hesitate.
Are there any questions or comments? Councillor George.
Thank you. Councillor Bridge, can you please confirm about the fly tipping on Bold Street in Fleetwood, that it actually wasn't fly tipping and it was construction material that was done by the company, and it was removed by the company and an officer. Also, at the same time, could you please thank the officer for his very timely work?
Yes, thank you. Obviously, as soon as it was drawn to our attention, we stepped in and spoke to the builders. To be fair to the builders, it was only there for 2 days. There was some ridiculous suggestion to be there for 4 weeks by, I don't know who, but I have to say hysteria like that doesn't help anybody. It certainly doesn't help our council's reputation when it's a lie. We would have been aware of it, whether it's drawn to our attention or not, within 2 days. Our officers on the ground are superb. Not just good, they are superb. As soon as we were aware, we contacted them. It turns out they were waiting for another skip. They've been creating an awful lot of waste, but they've been skipping it. There was a slight issue with rubbish around the back, which again was sorted out. People have to make a living, and I have to say our officers are very, very good in being flexible as well. We don't want a reputation whereby wire is so inflexible that we're jobs worths, because we're not. Our officers are there to help everybody out and to be practical, and they were, and I will pass that on because, as I say every time, I'm very proud of the people that work for us on our behalf.
Thank you, Councillor Bridge. Councillor Armstrong, you got a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On Sunday, a constituent asked me to meet with him, so I met with him regards district enforcement and the behaviour of 2 district enforcement staff. Now, my constituent has decided to pay the fine. He didn't want to go through the stress of chasing the appeals, but the fine itself wasn't his complaint. His complaint was the behaviour of the 2 officers. He was approached very early in the morning when it's still dusk. He's on his own. He's an elderly gentleman on his own. The 2 members of staff approached him. They were very aggressive. He felt he was very shaken. In fact, he said to me that he considered phoning the police to ask about this because he felt that he was being harassed by the 2 members of staff. Now, I would draw the council's attention to the government's code conduct of practice on litter and refuse, Part 1A, Section 11.7D, which is the enforcement guidance. It says, if a littering offence is accidental, for example, if something falls from someone's pocket, in order to maintain public trust in the legitimacy of enforcement action against littering, enforcement action should only be taken when there is evidence of an intent to drop and leave litter. It is not in the public interest to take enforcement action if there is no clear evidence that the individual intended to cause litter. Now, from this case and from many other cases that myself and other councillors have received, it seems clear to me that the public trust in the legitimacy of enforcement action has been broken. I therefore ask that the Council acts to ensure that the conduct of the enforcement officers is in line with the Government's Code of Practices in order to restore public faith in this service.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong.
Well, if I could break that down, there's several aspects to this. First of all, with regard to the attitude of the officers, I mean, if you if you were to give me the details, then of course I'll look into that, because every officer has a body cam. If they have been aggressive, then certain action will of course be taken. Secondly, it happened at dusk. Well, I don't care when people drop litter. We approach them and we find them. Thirdly, we are aware of the government protocols, and that's part of the contract, is part of what we do. Absolutely, when people drop something inadvertently and pick it up or whatever else, then we don't find them. I absolutely agree with you that we have to have faith in the system, and the people do. And finally, it's a great system. It's robust. I have absolute faith in it. Our towns and villages are so much tidier. You must be talking to different people to me, because certainly the people in Poulton that I speak to love it. Absolutely love it. No cigarette butts or anything else. And finally, if you drop litter and you do it deliberately, you deserve absolutely everything that we can throw at you, because this is our environment, it's where we live. Why should we put up with other people not living up to the standards that we should all do?
Thank you, Councillor Bridge. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Bridge, you referred to the creation of a Century Garden at Fleetwood Memorial Park. That sounds like a great idea. But could I ask that sometime in the next year that you bring back to full council the success or otherwise of the Century Garden? It sounds promising, and if successful, perhaps it's something that we consider for other parks in the borough.
Yeah, could I just ask what you would say was success? I mean, I'm not trying to be awkward at all. I'd be delighted to come back and report to you. Absolutely, we're very proud of this work that's gone on. But what would you like to see, as it were?
Well, the success of people actually...
So visits?
Visits, yes.
Yeah, we can... Come on. Monitor it. Yeah, we can try and monitor it and let you know. Of course we can. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Bridge. Councillor Colette Birch.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like, if possible, please, if you would convey my thanks to Alan Fitzpatrick. I had a telephone call from a resident deeply concerned about some litter that was facing him each time he left his front door. He was an elderly gentleman. His house was spick and span, and he had to come out and see this litter. One of his team went to the site, and it was all cleared by the residents at no cost whatsoever to Wyre Council because of the intervention of one of Alan's team. So thank you very much. If you'd pass that on, I'd be very grateful.
I'll be delighted.
Can you all please leave the chamber by the nearest exit and follow the instructions of the officers?
I don't mind getting the box back. Ladies first.
Executive now to say a few words.
And it will be very short, and congratulations to everyone, because you all abided by the instructions and we evacuated the chamber within less than 2 minutes, so congratulations to you. But we didn't realise that there was going to be a separate meeting going on in one of the committee rooms, and they evacuated as well, so every credit to them as well. We haven't had a test for you as elected members in meetings, and we should have done, and that was an error on our part. So at least the day, what's cold was dry. But well done, congratulations, you evacuated in less than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Payne. We'll return to the agenda now. The Planning and Economic Development Portfolio holder, Councillor Michael Vincent, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Reports before members. As you'll have seen from the report, there's plenty going on at the minute, most of which will sort of start to crystallise in sort of March, April time, so we should hopefully have some good news, fingers crossed, around then.
Any questions or comments for Councillor Vincent? Councillor Fale, will you go first, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The funding announcement for rail reinstatement feasibility studies, obviously very good news for the Fylde Coast. The area is crying out for improved connectivity and the revitalisation of Thornton, Cleveland and Fleetwood. So this is a good first step. But let's get one thing straight. The funding is in place in spite of the actions taken by the Tory group. Why are Tories have been behind the curve?
Can we please listen?
Why are Tories have been behind the curve? In terms of rail reinstatement, you could say they've been behind the Poulton curve for many a year. Many of the Labour councillors are wondering when was the Why are Tories road to Damascus moment, because every time we've tried to move things forward, it's been met with indifference or objection. Despite the Labour group pressing strongly for the local plan and the enterprise zone master plan to include a rail line reinstatement strategy, Conservative councillors and their cabinet chose to wave through flawed plans, leaving in place some gaping holes. And with regard to Wyre's business plan, this contained no vision to improve the transport infrastructure until Labour pressure was brought to bear in March 2019. Indeed, when Labour pointed out the omission in March 2018 full council, every Tory councillor present voted against Labour's amendments to include such a vision. That Wyre Tory councillors continually ignored the worsening transport and employment situation in Wyre is a matter of huge concern for Wyre residents. But at least on this occasion, it seems that Wyre Tory council has finally come round to Labour's way of thinking. Now, the error of judgment has hopefully been accepted. Can I now ask if we can expect the local plan and the enterprise zone master plan to be updated to contain the vision and the objectives that should have been in place from the outset? It is essential that the rail line reinstatement is given the necessary priority. The reinstatement cannot be allowed to be an afterthought or seen as a nice to have. It is integral to the regeneration of North Fylde and should be treated as such.
Thank you, Councillor Fale. Councillor Vincent, would you please respond?
I will do, Madam Mayor, but I have to say, Groundhog Day is the 2nd of February, not the 6th. He is just simply and utterly wrong, as he always is. It's just exasperating. Firstly, and I'll say this in as simple terms that hopefully Councillor Fale will finally understand, we are not a transport authority. Secondly, we are not Network Rail. We are not. We do not have the resources to fund this. We do not have the authority to make these decisions. It has been the policy of this council since long before he was a member of it to support the reopening of the railway line. However, we can't afford to pay for it, nor if we could afford to pay for it, do we have the authority to do it. What is necessary is for the relevant bodies who are to become in support of it, as has now happened with the Conservative government. You're welcome. Then the next thing that's required is there needs to be an appetite for that to happen. Well, that appetite now exists, and it doesn't exist in spite of this council. It exists because of it. Now, the difference with the way the Conservative group do things and the way the Labour group do things is they wanted to take £35,000 of taxpayers' money and flush it down the toilet on what would buy you essentially a very pretty front cover for a feasibility report, because you aren't getting a feasibility report for the sort of money they were planning on spending on it. We have a commitment of £100,000 from the government to look into this, but that is the tip of the iceberg. You have to factor in as well that even before that announcement, we had made a commitment within the Future High Street bid that we would put money in the pot towards a feasibility study. So all of this is going on, and ignore the grandstanding, ignore them trying to take the credit for any of this, because it's just ridiculous. Essentially, this council's policy has been the right one. We support whatever can come forward, and we will continue to support whatever can come forward, but it has to be deliverable. As to the local plan, he is wrong again, because the local plan protects the railway line. So it should be considered in the local plan. It is. Read it. In the second part, in terms of the enterprise zone,
Councillor Vincent, you have 30 more seconds.
The enterprise zone has nothing to do with the railway line, and so the enterprise zone master plan is perfectly fine how it is.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent. Councillor Sean Turner, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Reference 6.3. But I'd just like to say, Madam Mayor, I'm pleased to see that Councillor Beavers and Councillor Fail seem happy with the investment coming from the Conservative government. So it's great to see you might be lending us your vote next time round in 5 years.
Members.
Reference 6.3, and this is about a local plan, our local plan, and the annual position statement. And our ability to declare a 5-year land supply, which is really pleasing. As you can see, that the others nationally weren't, that were submitted at the same time. I just wanted to draw your attention to my neighbouring authority, which is Preston, which is run by a Labour administration. Currently right on the border of wire there, because they've not got the ability to demonstrate a 5-year supply of land, despite not having some of the restrictions that we have in terms of flooding and highways here. There's unplanned developments, large unplanned developments coming forward. So it's great to see that this Conservative administration and the planning department in particular have managed to pull this off. So if you could pass that on for me, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Armstrong, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a point of clarification, really, from the portfolio holder, if he could. In paragraph 6.1 of the report, he refers to a partial review of Wire's adopted local plan. Can he confirm that this will take into account the requirements of climate change, whether there be obvious changes or those deemed essential by the recently created Climate Change Policy Group?
Thank you. Would you like to respond, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor. The review of the local plan is related to the issues that the inspector had with the local plan. I'm not aware that climate change was one of them. The review of the local plan and the scope for it is not something that has yet been decided, and that will be decided in due course, and it will be decided with the direct input of the Planning Policy Committee. So I won't preempt whatever that committee comes up with and what the decision is taken. Obviously, since we started the work on the local plan, we've certainly the approach that this council and the wider public have taken to climate change has moved on somewhat, and so I don't think it's unreasonable to say that we would certainly consider that, but also we do have to be mindful of the fact that it's not an entirely new plan, it is just a review, so there's only so much that we can do. So it's not a yes, it's not a no, it's we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent. That concludes the consideration of the Planning and Economic Development Portfolio Holders Report. We will now move on. Oh, sorry, we've all missed you. Will.
Please come and speak. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Vincent, first of all, thank you for replying so quickly with the email response to last time's question. Now I'm going to go back to the market. I'm not going to bring up the rail, though I do think it was very disappointing. I was the one that had to tell him there was no station in Fleetwood.
You didn't tell him, you shouted.
Oh, he didn't. He said we had one. He learnt afterwards not to be wrong about Fleetwood. Anyway, get back to my point. On Tuesday last, we had a town council meeting and a constituent was very concerned about the areas of the entrances where the stall holders are congregating and smoking. They're making it a very, as they walk through to get in, it's like walking through a cloud of smoke, apparently. Now, he suggested that there is a place on the outdoor market near the bins where perhaps a smoking shelter could be put. Is that anything that you could look into?
Councillor Vincent, will you please respond?
Yes, definitely. No problem. Well, whether or not it's suitable to put it there, but certainly if there's traders congregating around an entrance, that's not acceptable.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent. Are there any more questions before we sign off on this one? Right, that concludes the consideration of the Planning and Economic Development Portfolio Holders Report. We will now move on to the report of the Neighbourhood Services and Community Safety Portfolio Holder. Councillor Berry, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My report is before members. I'll do my best to respond to any inquiries raised.
Councillor Ballard, I think you're the first one with your hand up.
Yes, Councillor Berry, it's reference a big thank you from myself for turning up invited to the mustard seed along with Lorraine Beavers and Craig Armstrong. We met Father John and Hilary Craig from the mustard seed. Would you like to inform the council of, you know, what we discussed and how we may be able to implement the help in homelessness and sleeping rough?
Can I firstly thank Councillor Beavers for mentioning this at the last full council, and I was very pleased that I was able to come accompanied by one of the wire officers, the housing officers, to the mustard seed. I think first of all I'd like to draw attention to the work of the volunteers there who do a fantastic job looking after those that come into the mustard seed and are given a splendid hot meal and generally looking after them. There's some good stories there that have worked. There's a lot of people that need help, and it was good to meet Father John, who told us that the Trust had bought the old Fleetwood Hospital and their plans to relocate up to there. And as part of that relocation, he was hoping to get a lot of integrated services up there to help those that come into what he's going to call the pantry, so that they can get help under one roof, for want of a better word. He was hoping that he would have services from Regenda, from health, and other services, including from Wire Council. If we could get an officer there from time to time to help those who have homeless problems, or probably other help that they may need through the council. And I can see how integrated services would be of assistance to people, and it may, in fact, help our officers who could be on site and deal with inquiries rather than people coming to them and they're having to send messages out. So it is a possibility, but I do need to discuss it first with the housing team, and as soon as that conversation's taking place, we'll come back to Father John and let him know what our thoughts are. But I obviously hope that we can help because it's a fantastic scheme that he's planning.
Thank you, Councillor Berry. Councillor Beavis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd also like to publicly thank you and your wire officer for your attendance at the Mustard Seed this Monday evening. I'm glad that you could see firsthand the scale of the poverty and homelessness in Fleetwood. And I hope that after speaking to Father John and the staff from Cat Smith's office and the volunteers from the Mustard Seed Group, you are now fully aware of the desperate need to engage with the vulnerable adults within the Fleetwood area. There is so much more we could and should be doing as a council, and I very much hope that we can continue to work together to try and improve the future of our vulnerable residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think when you go there, you realise that quite a few people there have multiple problems which do take time to sort out, and it takes time and patience and good members and officers to deal with that sort of thing sympathetically, to work out issues and problems. So I think we're all aware that you know, people do have, out of deprivation, do have multiple problems, and that we do need to work on it as a society. And we as a council do what we can within our own resources, and that we will continue to do. But I think it will help us to be able to meet under at one centre to try and see what we can really do to resolve and draw in other agencies to help. I think that's the stress we've got to do. There must be other partners involved in this.
Thank you. As there are no more questions, that concludes the consideration of the Neighbourhood Services and Community Safety Portfolio Holders Report. The next report is from the Leisure, Health and Community Engagement Portfolio Holder. Councillor Bowen, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My report's before you. I've only got one thing to add, and that's that if any of you know any community groups that want to raise money, get them to register with the lottery that we're running. It's really important, and it's so easy for them to get some money from this lottery. And that's it, really.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Fail, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was a little surprised that the action taken against a Cleveland's restaurant isn't covered in the report, but it's not a problem. I just wanted to say that the Environmental Health team should be congratulated for the action taken against the restaurant concerned. The particular establishment has on 2 occasions over the last few years been given a rating of 1, which means that major improvement was needed. Although temporarily closed down, I'm concerned the restaurants reopen without evidence to the public of an improved reassessment. Until yesterday, the Food Standards Agency website stated that the hygiene rating was still 1 and was saying a new rating was to be published soon. It now says awaiting inspection. One would hope that this indicates that it would still be shut if it hadn't improved, but perhaps Councillor Bowen can confirm this. The action taken by the Environmental Health team will help drive up food standards, but we do need to stop cases like this from arising in the first place. It is incredible that the display of food hygiene rating has been compulsory in Wales and Northern Ireland for a number of years. But that's not the case in England. It's simply unacceptable that establishments with a food rating of less than 3, which is satisfactory, can continue to put the health of customers at risk while customers are oblivious to the risk they are taking. This particular establishment has been serving food for many months while having a rating of 1. Had they been forced to display their rating of 1 on the door or the window, the restaurant would have, in all probability, upped their game and arranged for a reassessment immediately. The survival of their business would have required that. In March 2017, a report from the Food Hygiene Task Group was presented to Cabinet, and it was agreed that the leader and the Chief Exec would write to government to request bringing in legislation in England at the earliest opportunity. Well, here we are, 3 years later, and the public's health continues to be unnecessarily put in jeopardy. Can I therefore ask the portfolio holder if she would liaise with the leader and the Chief Exec and arrange for another letter to be sent to the government asking them to take urgent action that is now well overdue. We need to see an end to this blasé attitude to food hygiene by certain businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fail. Councillor Bowen, would you please respond to that?
Thank you. This council has got a really good reputation for inspecting food premises, takeaways and restaurants. We are really vigilant in inspecting them and making sure that places are safe in the borough. And we can't obviously do anything what we have to work under the Food Standards Agency, and we can't do anything what they don't approve of. The fact that they only had one standard rated as one standard, is because the officers will be going in all the time trying to work with them. That's what we try and do at the borough. We try and work with them, not just shut them down. Obviously, these people weren't prepared to work with the officers, so eventually they did get shut down. But you can rest assured that we work really, really hard to try and keep standards as high as what we can in this borough. Like, there's very few restaurants that actually go down to that standard of that particular one. Yes, we will. I will be asking the council to write to the government.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. As there are no more questions, that concludes the consideration of the Leisure, Health and Community Engagement Portfolio Holders Report. And that's the last of the executive reports this evening. Now is the opportunity for members of the Cabinet to make comments or ask questions of the reports of their colleagues. Do any Cabinet members wish to do so?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a question to the Deputy Leader regarding Councillor Beaver's question to me. Why did the Council reject the request from the Labour Group for £35,000?
Thank you, Leader. I'd be delighted to answer that question. Councillors will be interested to note that the week before she proposed that amendment to our budget, she proposed an amendment of a similar nature to the County Council in relation to their budget, but she was asking them for £50,000, so we were getting the cut price version. The reality is that the Labour Party and the Labour Group in particular here had no idea whatsoever what the cost of the feasibility would be, and they didn't know then and they don't know now, although they should know now, because in fact the real cost is over £600,000 and not £35,000 or £50,000. So what they were engaging in was gesture politics. Nothing more, nothing less. There was no serious intent. The second part of the reason why we rejected it was that we have significant reserves then, and we do now, and we made the point to them that if in reality there was a chance of a feasibility study going forward to which we could contribute, because we're not a transport authority, then we would be happy to do so. And we have always been happy to do so, and we are now. And the agreement that's been reached between the parties is that we will cooperate with our neighbours and we will push this forward and drive it forward at a hell of a lot more than £35,000.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent. Are there any more questions from the Cabinet? In that case, that concludes the consideration of the executive reports. We will now move on to agenda item 8, and this is a periodic report from the Council's Younger People's Champion, Councillor Kay. Councillor Kay, would you please introduce your report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members, my report is in front of you. I'm happy to answer any questions or any comments, take any comments. If you haven't got any, I would just like to say, does everybody know Happy Being Me? Do you know what that means and what it stands for? That is our looked after children in Lancashire, but we have several in Wyre. And Happy Being Me is this book that I've brought if anyone wants to have a look. And it started off with in 2017, where young people did a letter to themselves from being in care. So whether they went into care from very young, and they wrote a letter all about themselves, and they were up in Fleetwood Library. So it was great to get over there, and we were on the map, and we could actually meet our children and young people that have been in care. So in 2019, we produced a book, and this is it, and it's got all the letters in. So if anybody would really like to have a look at it and borrow it and pass it on back to me, it's really touching to know the life of what our children see and what they've gone through. So even though you had no questions tonight, I bet none of you knew what that was about. So I just thought I'd inform you on that, and then you know. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Kay. We now move on to questions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to make the comment, Madam Mayor, that after reading this report, that it's commendable that having been given this role or in a subject she is very passionate about, Councillor Kay has actually been proactive and physically active involved in this position, and not like some just paying lip service to a role. Wyre are lucky to have her and should thank her for the positive input she has had into the lives of some of the young people of this borough.
Thank you.
Councillor George, please.
Councillor Kay, I'd just like to thank you for the work that you've been doing with the Youth Council and the Youth Mayor. And also I've been asked by the Youth Council, I volunteer with them, I've been asked to invite you along to come and see some of the sessions that they do, which is every other week, and they'd be delighted to have you along.
Pop me an email, let me know.
Are there any other questions before Councillor Kay responds? In that case, Councillor Kay, would you like to respond to those?
I would love to go to the Youth Council. Whenever they ask me, I do turn up. And I thank Councillor Humphrey's comment.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. That concludes that item. The report is noted. The next item is a report submitted by the Corporate Director of Resources on a review by the Independent Remuneration Panel of the Members' Allowance Scheme. Councillor Henderson, are you happy to introduce the report and to propose the recommendations, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, happy to introduce the report, go straight to recommendations 3.1 and 3.2. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the proposal?
I'll second that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vincent. This stage. As there are none, we will proceed immediately to the vote. Would members please vote now on the recommendations? Those in favour, please show. That's unanimous, so we can continue. The recommendations are thereby approved. The next item is notices of motion. However, as there are none, you'll all be delighted to hear that that concludes the business for the evening, and it gives me great pleasure now to close the meeting. Thank you for attending.